and media relations, digital consulting, including digital and social media assessment reports for our clients, and we do quite a bit more. We're really excited to be partnering with BuzzSumo on this project. And Susan, would you like to share a bit about BuzzSumo?
Yeah, thanks, Helen. My name is Susan Moeller. I am the Business Development Manager for BuzzSumo. We are a company that was founded in 2014. We provide a software that helps content marketers, publishers, and public relations agencies create better content through research, amplification, and monitoring. There are currently 150,000 registered users of our product, including some larger companies like BuzzFeed and Spotify. So I'm really excited to be talking with you about the results of the research that Helen has done.
Great. So just going to the next page here. In this presentation, we're going to talk first about the 1,000-foot level. We're going to look at what is content amplification and why does it matter so much. Then in part 2, we're going to look at the actual study that we did and our findings. I'll explain a bit about how we conducted the study, and we'll look at the high-level results. In part 3, we'll do a deeper dive to look at the different social media platforms used by law and accounting firms, and Susan will have some great insights to share on additional platforms. Then in part 4, we do an even deeper dive into the top shared items of law and accounting content, the top items that we analyzed to ask why was this content so well shared, what made it so successful. And then finally, in part 5, we'll be bringing it all together with our conclusion and takeaways that we hope you will find helpful and applicable to your own firms and companies. So that being said, Susan, you want to take it away?
Sure. In most industries today, a key task of content marketing is getting the attention of the reader. There is so much content available that people who want to learn about a subject have many, many different options to choose from. And that's what Mark Schaefer is alluding to in this quote. He said, content supply is exponentially exploding while content demand is flat. It's no longer possible, if it truly ever was, to simply create great content and wait for the shares, clicks, and links to accumulate. We're going to look at several ways to create and amplify content that gets social shares, but first, Helen is going to talk a little bit about why these types of metrics actually matter.
Great. That's a great quote. So I was in the process of working on this study. I was shocked to learn that 33%, and I'm sure that number is growing every month, of all content now gets discovered via social networks. And if you think about that for a second, that essentially means a fundamental change to the news landscape. Instead of going to CNN.com or opening up the paper, people are going to Facebook and seeing an article that their friends have shared and clicking it on CNN.com through Facebook. That's essentially what's happening. So there's no question anymore that if you're interested in PR, if you're interested in communications and media relations, that social media plays a massive, massive role in that. There is, of course, associated value, SEO value that social media brings to the table. It really elevates interaction with your content, and that has a big impact on your SEO, so there's value there. And then finally, we just did some back of the napkin math in creating this study, looking at, say, a law firm with 300 partners and 700 associates. Each partner spends on average 2 hours, and each associate perhaps 8 hours per month, which is relatively conservative on non-billable writing. Annually, if you add it all up, that's $25 million worth of content marketing, and that's a big investment. So the bottom line here is there's a lot of money going into this. We want to make sure that you are getting the most bang for your buck. Content is king was the phrase, a few years ago we all knew. I think the phrase today stands true, and that is content amplification is now king. In working on this study, we really talked with BuzzSumo about the fact that if you don't have some sort of content amplification strategy in place, it's probably not worth creating the content in the first place, because there are an estimated 2 million blog posts published every day on the internet. So content without some sort of amplification is just simply lost. It is, again, the most critical part of the content generation process, and we're going to talk about some content amplification strategies in this presentation. There are a variety of ways to do content amplification and to measure the success of your program, and social media shares is one very important way, and this is, of course, the focus of our study. So to tell you a little bit about what we did here, we used the BuzzSumo tool to look at content amplification via social media shares in two industries, legal and accounting, to assess who was employing the better strategy. We took top 100 lists from highly regarded U.S. trade publications to gather up the URLs of law and accounting firms that we wanted to analyze, and then we plugged them into the BuzzSumo tool and just started crunching the numbers, looking at the data, looking for trends and charting out what we saw. At first, we conducted a high-level analysis, which we'll look at in just a minute, and then we conducted a deep dive to provide insight that we can all use to improve our content amplification strategies. So without further ado, this is what we found on the high-level 1,000-foot level. Just average number of shares per article analyzed. Accounting firms were really doing a much better job than law firms, and there's a variety of reasons for that, but one might say, well, the Big Four are responsible for this big difference. To a certain extent, that's true. They are certainly very powerful content marketing machines. However, even when we removed the top 4 accounting firms as a whole still received 33% more shares than law firms. So they're doing something better, and let's find out what. We also did a little bit of a deeper dive into what social media channels law and accounting firms were using, and these are the results that we found. Generally speaking, one of the interesting findings were that accounting firms seem to be more readily using a wider range of platforms, whereas law firm focus seemed to be almost exclusively on LinkedIn. So here we can see the breakdown again. Top channels utilized by the accounting industry were LinkedIn, number 1, number 2, Google+, number 3, Twitter, and number 4, Facebook. And law firms, the top platforms used were LinkedIn, then Facebook and Twitter, and Google+. Susan.
So I want to talk a little bit about what our research shows about content that performs well on Facebook. But before I do, I think it's important to address the why question. For professionals in the legal and accounting fields, why is Facebook important? And the simple reason is this: Facebook drives people to your site. And if you're wondering about how much traffic might come to your website through Facebook, right now the answer is about 25%. 25% of all traffic to websites now comes from Facebook. So you can see in this chart how Facebook has gained steadily on and now overtaken Google. So if you aren't already, it's time to take your visibility on Facebook seriously. Now, we've just released our analysis of 1 billion Facebook posts, and this is a summary of our conclusions about the type of posts that get the most engagement. The first type of posts that get the most engagement is questions or images. It's especially powerful if you combine the two. Short form posts, that means posts that have 50 or less characters, get more interactions, and that equates to about 25 words. It's actually 1/3 of what you would typically put in a tweet. We've also discovered that directly embedded videos that you've uploaded to Facebook instead of sharing a link to YouTube or YouTube or Vimeo get more engagement than I'm sorry, I need to restate that. If you upload a video to Facebook directly, that is going to get more engagement than if you just share a link to a video that is housed at YouTube or Vimeo. Another couple of things that you might want to keep in mind is that you don't want to use hashtags in your Facebook posts. Those get less engagement. So if you're switching back and forth between posting to Twitter and posting to Facebook, when you put the post into Facebook, you want to remove the hashtags. We've also discovered that posts published between 10 p.m. and 12 a.m. of your audience's local time get more interactions, as do posts that are published on Sunday. The jury's still out on why that's the case. One of the factors that we think might contribute to this is that there's just less competition at those times, so there's more of a likelihood that your post will be in someone's news feed because there's less available at that time. Our research didn't actually give us the why that's true bit of the equation, but it did show that you'll get more engagement from your posts if you publish between 10 p.m. and 12 a.m. of your audience's local time. We also discovered that if you're posting images, if you also have an Instagram account, your images will get better engagement if you post them through Instagram instead of posting them directly to Facebook. So you should keep these results in mind when you're posting to Facebook so that you can grab more audience attention there and ultimately get more people to visit your site. Now, I also want to suggest that you should consider Pinterest. And there are some important reasons that I will explain more fully in the next minute or two. But before you stop listening, I want to address head-on one of the misconceptions about Pinterest. It's not just a bunch of women sharing pictures of wedding dresses and recipes. The fastest growing segment of Pinterest users is actually men, and there are more men on Pinterest than subscribe to GQ and Sports Illustrated combined. Even if that weren't true, I'm going to argue that if women hire you, you should consider marketing where they are. Now, people are also pinning content already from the big accounting firms. Here is a picture of the pins from Deloitte.com, and I'll wait for the slides to catch up. There we go. Now, these are not things that Deloitte has necessarily put on Pinterest. These are things that people have gone to the Deloitte website and selected to pin into their own Pinterest boards. PwC has 39 boards and 1.2 thousand followers for their global brand, as well as pages with followers for their smaller geographical brands as well. So here are a couple of other points to keep in mind about Pinterest and why you might want to consider it. Pinterest has 100 million users, and 93% of them are using Pinterest to plan purchases. That means that there are 93 million shoppers all in one place. Another thing to keep in mind is that when people use Pinterest, they are thinking of what they would like their lives to be like. It's that powerful aspirational mode. And it's different than Facebook. When people are on Facebook, oftentimes they're trying to show off the best part of their lives as they are now. On Pinterest, people are planning for a better future. So why not help them see how your service could be a part of that? One last thought, Pinterest is actually more of a search engine than a social network, and there's still room at the table. The B2B space isn't as crowded at Pinterest. So at the very least, I would encourage you to take a look at the traffic that is coming to your site in Google Analytics. See which social network drives the most traffic to you. Consider the potential that they offer you, and then put a plan in place to use social networks to drive customers to your site.
Fantastic, Susan. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So this here represents part 4 of our presentation, where we did a deeper dive into the top 30 most shared content in both the law firm and the accounting firm groups. The top accounting firm content received, as you can see, a massive number more shares than the top law firm content. So again, accounting firms are doing something right. When we drilled into the articles to kind of assess them and assess what was, why they were attracting more shares, here's what we found. 43% of this content from accounting firms employed infographics versus 13% for law firms. 46% employed video from accounting firms versus 10% from law firms. And this next one really gets my goat, if you I think that's an English saying, but I just view this as such low-hanging fruit. The photos here, 83% of the accounting firm content employed them. Only 50% of the law firm content employed photographs. And considering all the research out there that indicates how adding images to your content really does augment it, really does, even if it's a stock image that you don't, you spend 5 seconds finding, it still increases engagement. Humans are visual creatures by nature. So this right here is very low-hanging fruit that law firms could be doing a better job of employing. Original research, again, accounting firms doing more of that than law firms, and co-produced content. We'll talk about that in a little bit. I was actually surprised to see that both neither law or accounting firms are employing that last piece all that much, but certainly accounting firms are doing more of it. So on the topic of infographics, as we saw, they can really increase engagement. Tools like Canva and Piktochart, there's so many of them out there now that can make creating infographics very easy and simple. You don't need to be a designer. If you have content that lends itself to an infographic, really give that some serious thought, because it can increase engagement tremendously. We talked about video and photos. Video, of course, is taking over the world. I was talking to a law firm just the other day in Texas that has developed its own in-house video studio with all sorts of accoutrements, and whenever they have partners visiting, they get them in the studio on a variety of different things, and they employ all sorts of videographers, editors, people who are highly creative to create great video. And I think that's the direction a lot of professional services firms are going in now. Original research, of course, this news by definition is new. So if you're saying something that nobody has said, more people are going to listen. But it does take work. So it is a balance and it's a consideration, but it certainly does receive engagement. And then co-produced content. I really like the strategy because I was myself in-house for several years, a marketing director, and having a PR brain as well, I sought often to try to partner with my clients, even my competitors in some cases, to co-produce content because, number one, there's tremendous business development value. The process of crafting the content and talking about it and being creative is such a tremendous way to bring people together. And number two, if you partner with somebody that has a great network, especially today with social media, and they share your content, you have an automatic megaphone, automatic ability to elevate your content very, very, very quickly through their network as well as your own. So it's a very good strategy, and one that we can talk a little bit more about, because BuzzSumo has some tools that can help you identify people that will help you, that you can partner with, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. I wanted to make an observation about content length that I just found so interesting from this study. BuzzSumo and Moz put together their own study across the web and across all industries. I guess it was last year, Susan, and it revealed that the longer the content, the more likely it was to be shared. And again, this was across all industries, across a massive, massive data download they did. We did not find this in the professional services context, at least in the study that we did here. Generally speaking, what we found was that for law and accounting firms, the longer the content, the less likely it was to be shared, and shorter, generally speaking, is better. I get asked why this is, and I think we can all make guesses in our minds. One of the things I suspect is that, you know, professional services content can be quite dense, can be quite cerebral, and also it may not contain as many images, and in other words, the longer the content, the less digestible it is, because it becomes much more complex, much more long, perhaps not broken up properly with images and graphics and other elements that make the content digestible. It's hard to know exactly, but what I do know is that for professionals who bill by the hour, this is good news. It doesn't mean you don't want to create long-form, in-depth studies. I would not discourage that, because obviously that has its own benefit and its own benefit in terms of sharing, but it means you don't necessarily have to write longer content for it to be better. And I know, having worked in-house with a lot of attorneys, they very naturally enjoy writing. They're very good at it. They might want to write great long articles, and this can be a piece of data that can show them, you know what, instead of spending those 50 hours writing this piece, perhaps just spend 10, make it a lot shorter, and actually you'll get more bang for the buck. So we're going to transition now to let Susan talk for a few minutes about that BuzzSumo Moz study. Again, that was not focused on the legal and accounting firm industry. It was across the web, but there's some really great data from it that we can look at now, and that are applicable to our industry. So Susan, you want to take it away?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Ellen. I think your point was a really good one when you said that consider even co-producing content with competitors. That's definitely something that we haven't necessarily shied away from at BuzzSumo. You know, we will work with lots of people in our industry, even if there are portions of their tools that overlap with services that we offer. So I'm glad you made that point. Now,
and
to our study.
That's what this study is that we're talking about right now. So this is an example. Yeah.
Exactly. Good point. Yeah. So here's some of the takeaways from our study with Moz. Basically, we looked at posts from across the web. We analyzed 100 million articles for the purposes of this study. And specifically, we were looking for content that got highly shared and content that also got a lot of links. And we found that there were a couple of things that the most shared content had in common. And one of those things was images. Having one images doubles your shares on Facebook and on Twitter. Now, the Moz BuzzSumo study was done across the web from all different sectors, but I was just looking last night at top accounting firms and top law firms, and I looked at their 10 most shared pieces of content, and the law firms had images in only 2 of the top 10 pieces of content that got the most shares. And those images were actually photos of what looked like art-directed pieces of content for a download. The accounting firms, it was reversed. They had images, and for the most part, really compelling images in 8 out of the top 10 pieces of content. The remarkable thing is that the accounting firms got 210,000 shares for the most shared article, and it ranged down to, I think it was 4.9 thousand. The law firms, which had very few images, the highest number of shares they got was about 1,000, and it ranged down to 500. So while it wasn't a huge amount of data that I looked at, it did seem to bear this out in this specific industry. The second thing that we found is that content that elicits an emotion receives more shares than content that does not. People like to share things that are surprising or unexpected. They like to share warnings for their friends. So keep that in mind. If you can elicit an emotion, that's a great thing. 8 of the top 10 most shared items of content were actually quizzes. So if there's a way that you can take your content and make it into a quiz, that could be a really good thing to get your content shared. I've actually made quizzes before with a free tool called Quizzer, QZZR. So if you want to check that out later, it really simplifies the process of making quizzes.
That's a great point, Susan. I'll just interject here because often we get the question in the law and accounting firm, professional services firm context. You know, it's very hard to create things like quizzes. We're not, we're not into doing things like how tall should you be or what star sign are you and things like that. But one of the examples I'd like to use, one of our clients puts it kind of in the compliance area, and they put out regular word jumbles on Facebook and LinkedIn, I believe, and they just ask people, unjumble this word, and people love it. They go for it. Very often they maybe take a moment out of their day to unjumble the word and interact with the content, and it has lots of benefits. So you can really get creative there, and it doesn't all have to be about star signs and other things. It can really be applicable if you get creative.
That's a great point. Now, we also found that the most shared types of content in order were infographics, lists, why posts, and how-to articles. Now, for the purposes of our study, we defined why posts and how-to articles as content that had why or how-to as the first words in the headline. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that you don't necessarily need to change everything to get these types of content into your editorial calendar. You probably already have lots of content that could actually be repurposed as one of these types of posts. I think about at our site we have a post called the business case for using BuzzSumo. That could easily be rewritten as a why post, why you need BuzzSumo to boost your bottom line. Or it could be written as a how post, how BuzzSumo can help increase your profits this year. So take a look at the content that you already have and ask yourself if there's content already on your site that you could repurpose to meet one of these different categories. Now, the other thing that I found is that people share trustworthy content. They're looking for a byline and a biography that they respect. So definitely building your brand is important. Another thing that we found is that having just one influencer retweet your content results in 32% more shares. That's actually quite significant. So when you see the impact that having an influencer share your content can have, I think the next most logical question is, how do I connect with influencers? BuzzSumo does offer a tool that can help you to identify influencers, which is the first step in the process. But just to outline it for you, even without using a tool, you want to look for people with an engaged audience whose interest overlaps with yours. So you're not necessarily looking for people who have the largest number of Twitter followers. You're looking for people who have people who are following them and commenting on their content or sharing the things that they tweet. You also want to look for people who are responsive to other users of social media. So if, example of that would be Google is tremendously influential in the world of SEO, but they are really too big to be responsive in most cases. Reaching out to someone with a smaller audience but a higher responsiveness rating would probably be better for someone in the SEO industry. Now, we can also help with the BuzzSumo tool, help to simplify the way you communicate with the influencers that you identify. But I'm not convinced that this process can ever be completely automated because essentially it's a human interaction. You need to invest time in building relationships with influencers that are mutually beneficial. And that's why collaboration is a great third concept to think about here. We frequently look to collaborate with influencers on content, asking them for quotes, sharing research, or doing webinars like this. The value for us is in the marketing area. This type of outreach keeps our marketing costs low and increases brand awareness, as well as driving some sales. Now, we also use this type of content collaboration to increase the social reach of our content. Consider this, I think Helen mentioned it earlier, if you collaborate on a blog post with an influencer, getting a quote for them or even asking them to co-author that piece with you, that influencer is almost guaranteed to share that information with their audience, and that increases your social distribution considerably. Another of our findings was that repromoting or repurposing old content can significantly increase the number of shares that content receives. So definitely you want to think about what content you already have. You want to consider your content as a business asset and ask yourself how you might be able to repurpose it. Keystone content like original research is expensive and time consuming. You want to make that content asset earn its keep. And one of the key ways that you can do that is to use it in many different formats. Research published as a blog can be converted into numerous other things, an infographic, a webinar, a white paper, an email, a case study. For any piece of content, you want to ask yourself how you can reuse or repurpose the information. And you also want to keep sharing the content. Don't just publish it, share it, and stop. So I wanted to give you a couple of different best practices for doing that, a couple of ways that you can be very intentional about rotating older content into your social channels. You want to do it frequently when the content is first published and then periodically after that. So if you use some type of post scheduling tool like Hootsuite or Buffer, when you schedule the initial post, go ahead and add some for the future, a month or two down the line. Then anytime you revisit your content, perhaps you're researching something or just rereading it for one purpose or another, go ahead and share it then and say why you were paying attention to it. I was writing a blog post and I looked at a couple of our older posts just to cross-reference things. While I was on the page, I just went ahead and shared those pieces and added a little line like, thinking about this today. Another thing that you can do is you can create Pinterest boards as part of any research processes that you're involved in. At first, make them secret. You don't want to put a Pinterest board out there that has very little content on it. So select that you want it to be a secret board at first. Add things to it as you research your topic, and use that to keep track of useful information as you research. Then, when your post is finished, you can add your content to that board and make it public. Another idea is to take advantage of the publishing feature on LinkedIn. When you publish a blog post, commit yourself to publish it on LinkedIn too. Now, the best practice there is to wait 2 weeks from the time that you've published the content on your blog. That allows search engines time to establish the parent URL of the piece. After those 2 weeks has gone by, go ahead and publish it again on LinkedIn and link to your site where it was originally published. Another idea is to take a collection of your blog posts on one topic and use them to create an ebook. And another thing that I think is really important to mention is you want to tap into your employees' social muscle. Make it easy and desirable for them to share your content.
And building off of that, well, first of all, Susan, I think all those tips are absolutely brilliant, and I think we should co-author an article just on that that could be that could be sent around to attorneys, because attorneys, I mean, and accountants too, they really do a lot of content generation themselves. So these tips, I think, would be fantastic for them. But then I just wanted to underscore what you just said. When we were putting together this presentation, Steve Rayson, who's the founder of BuzzSumo, said something to me on the phone that really resonated. He said, anything less than 10 shares means you're not sharing your own content. If you're a large company with hundreds or thousands of employees, which in this study, every single one of the companies we assessed was a very, very large company. But only one or two of them are sharing your content. Why would anyone else want to share it? And I think that that's such a good and true statement. And when we were looking through the data and looking at the shares, what jumped out at me was you can tell what's happening in both industries here, fundamentally. To me, it looked like from the data that most law firms, if not all, have hired social media managers. But that social media manager is sitting in an office and perhaps they're not empowered. Perhaps the vast majority of other employees at the firm do not take social media seriously. Perhaps it's just not quite integrated yet. So what you're seeing is a law firm's generating content and you see one or two shares. That social media manager is sharing on the firm's site or the firm's channels, and then perhaps his or her own, and that's it. Accounting firms, on the other hand, you're really seeing that, yes, they have a social media manager, but perhaps they might not have one. Perhaps they have them for a number of different practices or a number of different industry areas. And those social media managers, whoever they are, seem to be more empowered. They seem to be more networked into the companies. They seem to be conducting training among their employees to get them to use social media to elevate their brand content via multiple channels, and not just one or two channels. Perhaps even the accounting firms are employing some sort of competition or maybe even commissions or some way. Maybe they're judging their employees partly by content amplification. Maybe that's coming into play when people get their reviews. I don't know, but I could tell from the results and going through, seeing so many law firms with 1 and 2 shares, so many items of content with 1 and 2 shares, 1 and 2 shares, 1 and 2 shares, and seeing the other side of it with the accounting firms. I really think accounting firms are coming at this as a company-wide strategic program, as opposed to just, we hired a social media manager and now we're done with social media. So bringing this all together in our conclusion, and then we will jump to some of the questions. We've got some great questions sitting here. If you write it, they will come is no longer true. Really, content amplification strategies are critical to the success of any content that you produce. Low-hanging fruit photos. Susan, they've seen it from their own studies. BuzzSumo's seen it, I've seen other studies, and we similarly saw it in our own. Having images just elevates your content, and even if maybe they're not very good images, it still elevates the content, so it's worth thinking about and doing. Finding influences and leveraging them. I highly recommend you guys go and check out BuzzSumo's tool. You can look at your own URL, you can look at your competitors, you can look at anyone in your industry. Tinker around with keyword searches in bankruptcy or any other areas you cover, tax law, anything, and you can find influencers there that you might be able to form partnerships with. Building off of that topic, co-produce content with clients and other thought leaders, especially influencers. Another sort of fun accidental finding of this study is content length could be hurting its performance in professional services industry. Certainly something to keep in mind. And then finally, what we just discussed, the most successful content marketers are finding ways to approach social media in a company-wide strategic way as opposed to an individualistic way. So Susan, we have some questions here, and I'm going to take to the last screen here so you guys can get all of our credentials and the URL again while we tackle some of these great questions.
Great.
All right, so we have, is it true that for professional services firms 25% of traffic is driven by Facebook. Now, that stat that Susan discussed earlier, that was broadly across all industries. It wasn't just professional services. That is a great question. Candidly, I do not know the answer to that, and that's something that we should study perhaps next, because I think that's a fantastic question. Susan, do you have any thoughts?
No, I think it's a great question too. Definitely, we looked at two different venues, or I saw two different venues where that's true. One was in news sites, and the other was just in general sites. It does seem that across the web it's true. I mean, and I guess if you think about maybe how you use Facebook, you could see how that would be possible. I oftentimes, the things that I have time to read are the things that I discover in my Facebook feed. So if I see a news item there and it catches my attention, I go to it. And I think that that's probably fairly typical behavior.
We have another question here. Are these 1 billion posts general or specific to legal and professional services? I believe that refers to the BuzzSumo Moz study that was looking across all industries.
Yeah, again, actually, let me jump in.
Okay.
I was referencing with that one a separate study that we did. So there were two studies that BuzzSumo has done. The one that we did with Moz was of 100 million articles. So you can think of that as post-level content. Those are things that were blog posts or articles at websites. We also did a separate analysis of 1 billion posts on Facebook. So those were things that originated within Facebook. Yeah, and those were across the board. We were looking all across Facebook, not at the law and accounting industry specifically.
Great. Now this is a good question. With Facebook, do you advise law firms to set up a presence on the site like we would on LinkedIn and Twitter? Or would you recommend marketers teach or enable their attorneys to use Facebook to drive awareness engagement for the firm's content further? How would you approach change based on whether a law firm represents plaintiffs versus defendants? We take the first part of that question. Susan, I'll be interested to hear what you think. My thought is potentially both. You certainly want your attorneys to be engaging with Facebook. Many are. I think a lot of this boils down to training. I think, in my experience, many attorneys and professional services folks really appreciate coaching when it comes to what they can post, what they can't post. Some have their finger on the pulse of how Facebook is different from LinkedIn, and others struggle with that a little bit more. You know, the tricky thing here is there's a number of tricky factors in Facebook company pages, and sponsored postings, etc. It's become harder, in my experience at least, to get exposure for company pages on Facebook unless you pay Facebook. Now I know they're toggling and experimenting with that. They go swing one way and swing the other, and that's been a challenge, I think, for them as they've kind of entered into the paid posting market. But from my perspective and what I saw from this study, I think the more people you can get engaged on social media in appropriate and beneficial ways would be a good thing. What do you think, Susan?
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a great point. I think one thing that you want to keep in mind is that the goal of your interactions on social media needs to be focused on ultimately driving traffic to your own site. None of us are getting paid to increase Facebook's audience, right? So the pages that we create and our presence there, at least with regards to our work, is I think it's good to keep it focused on getting people to visit your site. So if having a Facebook page accomplishes that for you, then that's good. If just having people who are active on Facebook accomplishes that for you, then that may be the best way to go too. And I'd say probably for most people it's a both and situation.
Now, it's the second part of that question, how would you approach this based on a law firm representing plaintiffs versus defendants? We all know in the legal industry. We have certain requirements, and different states have certain standards we have to set and pay attention to. I certainly know in North Carolina they're very strong. And so that is a consideration, and one that often marketers don't like to think about all that much, but it's still a very important one to think about. And so, you know, I think for plaintiffs, you know, I would say 2 or 3 years ago, maybe more, plaintiffs firm definitely needs to be on social media. It's, you know, somebody who's trying to get access to consumers, someone who's trying to get on the map, trying to increase SEO for consumer-focused practice. Absolutely, social media. We hear from a lot of plaintiffs firms that really, really are under pressure for SEO, and so this is a major consideration for them. But I think what this study shows, and other studies that you know are in our space are starting to show, is that it's not just the plaintiff's world anymore for social media. It's definitely important for all professional services, whether you're marketing to consumers or if you're B2B. And I think that that's a very important point, and we're certainly seeing from a lot of our clients who are B2B a lot of pressure and consideration being paid to SEO now. Than even 4 or 5 years ago, they weren't as interested in SEO. So I think this is a consideration for everybody now at this point. And you know, if you have any follow-up questions on that, feel free to email me, because I think that's a great area to discuss, and certainly an evolving one. Can you please share some legal firms who are setting a great example of content marketing? That's a good question, and I will go back to a project that I worked on a long time ago. I think that's what is good marketing. It's you know, it's kind of like you know it when you see it. And I always remember I worked with John Hellerman a while ago, many years ago, and at that firm we put together a blog that was based on The Office. We had a female partner at one of our law firms, an employment law firm, blogging after every episode of The Office to say what the shenanigans would cost a real-life company in a real-life lawsuit, and that got a tremendous following.
Wow, that's a great idea.
It was an awesome strategy. It was super fun, yeah. And so I think you know, there are a lot of different ways of approaching this. I think social media is just another way to amplify great ideas. If the idea is sort of not that interesting to begin with, I don't think you can hope to expect all that much in the way of amplification. Certainly some of these tools and things that we mentioned will help, but you know, you've got to have a great idea to begin with. If you have a great idea, then boom, you know, people want to talk about it, people want to be interested in it. So I hope that helps answer the question. Susan, do you have any other thoughts?
You know, I would love to read those blog posts, by the way. But
I know.
Yes. Send me a link. The other thing that I think you want to keep in mind, and I was just looking at a few different websites. The content that I saw from the law firms was much more like a press release. It read sort of like, this is what we did, and this is how big we are, and this is how much revenue we have. And I understand that those things have a role, but I don't think that they lend themselves very well to social, simply because social media is social. And if you go to a party and all you do is talk about yourself, then, you know, before you know it, you're standing by yourself at the punch bowl. So I think keep the nature of social media in mind, and consider it like a party or a social setting, and keep things a little bit fun, keep things a little bit light, maybe talk about topics that aren't directly related to what you're doing, but are, tangentially related. Reflect the attention to other people periodically, and I think that that would be a great way to go.
I think that's a great point. We have a very good question here. You discussed waiting 2 weeks between posting your blog and then posting on LinkedIn. Is this the same case for Twitter? Our law firm immediately posts blog posts to social media. What do you think, Susan?
Yeah, that's a great question. And let me clarify that. I post immediately a link to content on Twitter and on Facebook, and I immediately post a link to my content on Facebook when I publish it. What I was referring to is in LinkedIn, where you can use their publishing tool and actually write a blog post in LinkedIn. So that was what I meant when I said wait 2 weeks. Anytime I write a blog post, I immediately share links on all social networks. Then 2 weeks later, I go into the publishing function of LinkedIn and I upload all my photos and I upload my text. It takes about 20 minutes. And then I add a link at the bottom of that content that says this was originally published on BuzzSumo.com. I hope that makes better sense.
That's fantastic. We have come to the end of our questions, and so I'm just going to say a huge thank you to Susan. I'm going to give you all 5 minutes of your life back because we are 5 minutes early. You go get another cup of tea or coffee. And thanks everyone so much. Don't hesitate to email us or reach out with any additional questions that you may have in the coming days. And thank you again.
Yeah, I appreciate your time, Helen. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.